morning.
Morning.
Good morning. All right, guys, we are going to get started. First and foremost, I am so sorry about that whole quiz situation. You have no idea. I mean, I know you do know because you kept trying to get on and take the quiz. So for those of you who had issues with it, I'm so sorry. It was very frustrating. I have no clue what happened, what went wrong. But I just had to make a new one, I guess. So again, I apologize. That was very frustrating, but that's what happens, I guess, with online virtual learning. We have unavoidable technology issues. So I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again in the future. Hopefully not. And I will do my best to try and avoid it. The second thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, I was speaking with Professor Carver and Professor David about lab, and I was kind of reflecting back on my own lab as well. Whereas most of you in my lab are very, very engaged and actually participating. However, along with the other two professors and my own lab, if you are not in there participating, engaging yourself, actually answering questions, you're going to be kicked out of the lab itself, because we break you guys up into groups. And if you're not helping your group, you're not participating, you are losing points for the day. So I had 2 students this past lab whom I had to kick out halfway through because there was no participation. That's unacceptable. You are in a lab for a purpose. If we weren't doing this online education, you would be with us in person in a classroom where you would be forced to be doing things and engaging and actually being active. So I am not understanding why you're not doing the same service for yourself at home. This is your education that you're paying for. And if you think you're just going to slide through and get away with doing the bare minimums, you're sadly mistaken. I hate to say, you're just not going to understand the material. You're just not going to be able to get by. So I think everyone needs to put forth a little bit more effort in engaging themselves. Most of you have been doing a great job. Like, I'm really impressed with how much participation you're putting forth, which is awesome. But again, don't be surprised if I begin to kick people out of lecture, if I begin to kick people out of lab, like I did the other day. Professor Carver and Professor David are going to be doing the same. So if there's an issue, maybe you have some sleeping disorder that I am not aware of. I'm not entirely sure, but we've made it very, very clear that you need to communicate with us off the bat. But yeah. And last thing, I'm going to share the syllabus with you. Your first exam is a week from Thursday. Exam number 1 is a week from Thursday. Good old syllabus tells you everything. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. So right here, week 5, that is next week. And the lecture exam is going to be, oh, that says 2, it's supposed to be 1. I'll change that. Lecture exam number 1 is going to be a week from Thursday. You will have to be on camera for the exam. This was mentioned on day 1, and that if you need some form of legitimate excuse and reason as to why you cannot be on your camera. However, people have used their phones before. Most of you have functioning phones with cameras. But yes, I mentioned on day 1 that for exams, we take the exam during class time, and that you need to have your camera on during the exam itself. What was I going to say? Take the exam in class. Your cameras have to be on because you take it via G2L. I don't remember what I was going to say. However, on Thursday, I'm going to, after class on Thursday, I'm going to send you guys out a whole study guide of what is going to be on the exam, along with probably some sort of Kahoot review that you can do with friends, you can do with yourselves, etc. It does not require the lockdown browser. That is just a mess in itself, the whole lockdown browser situation. I can't even get it to work on my own computer, so I can't expect you guys to have it. But cameras need to be on, okay? And this is a week from Thursday. Anastasia, I don't know what that is. What is note? Someone's gonna have to describe.
Like, can we use like notes that will be taken from the slideshows?
Notes, like an open note exam?
Yeah, like no. Okay, thank
sorry.
you. No, fine, thank you.
I thought it was like a program that you use that.
No, just like notes. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry. All right. We will talk more about this. Again, I will send out a study guide on Thursday along with Kahoot review. But that exam is a week from Thursday. Utilize your resources the best as possible. All right. And it's going to be on everything we covered from day 1 until we should be done by Thursday, but I feel like we're going to finish up some stuff next Tuesday. That's usually how it works. It's not the neuromuscular stuff there. It's not a long chapter at all. I keep it very simple, but we'll probably be finishing stuff up on Tuesday. Okay. Nicole, great question. Yes. No, I'm sorry. Index cards. So the flashcard assignment, the flashcard assignment begins basically. So the first set of flashcards are not due until exam number 2. And that's because we don't start doing actual muscles until starting basically right after the exam. So we start the shoulder a week after the exam. So that the flashcard assignment, if you guys have started doing flashcards already, that's awesome. But it does not, the first set of flashcards is not due until the second exam. Yes, the chart of words we need to do is on the assignment sheet in D2L. Evelyn, yes, it is taken, the exam is taken during class time. Isabel, no, as mentioned in the assignment sheet when we went over that on day one, I have a very specific means for the flashcards. They have to be handwritten and handmade. Whether you go out and buy flashcards or you take paper and you can rip it into squares and create flashcards. We are not doing flashcards via the computer, so we cannot type them. It has to be written out. There's very specific details in the assignment sheet. Alex, yes, I mentioned we are getting a study guide. On Thursday after class, I'm going to send out a study guide and a Kahoot for you guys. The study guide has everything that is going to be on the exam for you. Obviously not specific questions, but at least material and content to look over. I do not suggest waiting until the night before or even the 2 nights before to study. Sprinkle it in between now and next Thursday. Kahoot will be given after class on Thursday. I believe it is 50 questions, Andrea. It might be a little less. I don't really remember off the top of my head. I think it's around 50, maybe 40, and I usually give bonus questions as well with it. I'm gonna have to figure out how to do that on D2L. But.
I have a question.
Sure, Evelyn.
Is it set up like how the quizzes are set up on D2L, how it's going to be some matching and multiple choice or like fill in the blanks?
It'll be predominantly multiple choice. There are some true and false. I don't think there is matching on this first one. When we get to muscles, there's going to be some matching, but it's basically multiple choice. And then I usually have one short answer question. And that's the one I grade on my own. I always like doing a short answer because it gives you a chance to openly and freely express and explain your rationale and reasoning, whereas multiple choice, the answers are given right there for you. So it's mainly multiple choice, maybe about five to 8 true and false, and then a short answer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions before we begin our topic of does spelling count? No, but I do suggest you doing your best. I do not count spelling on the exam. Same thing for quizzes. Like we don't count spelling on the quizzes. Homeworks, it always will count because you have the material in front of you, so there's no reason for you to spell it wrong. But for exams and quizzes, just to make sure you're doing your best to spell it correctly. Yeah. Any other questions? I fixed that typo on the syllabus. I will repost that to make sure you have the right one on D2L. Okay, let us begin with good old myology today. My goal I do not want to rush this entire section because this is a lot of really important information like background info on the muscles itself. We'll probably finish it up on Thursday, and then on Tuesday, we'll briefly go over our sensory receptors. I haven't decided yet. I might put sensory receptors at the end.
Is Myology loaded onto D2L?
So I'll open it up. I did not open it up on D2L yet because there's going to be adjustments I want to make on. There were adjustments I want to make on the PowerPoint that when I was looking over it this morning, I was like, oh, I kind of want to fix the wording of this. So I will open it up for you as soon as I make the adjustments.
No problem.
Thanks, Naz.
Mhm.
All right, let's get going with myology. Okay, so myology. The term myo, M-Y-O, will always represent muscle. Myocardium, heart muscle. So myo always means muscle. Ology means the study of. So we're going to be looking at kind of the big picture of what a muscle looks like, why they're named, different components and characteristics of muscles itself. So there are three basic types of muscle tissue. The first type of muscle tissue that we don't really deal with often is called smooth muscle. So the surface of smooth muscle is actually legitimately smooth and kind of shiny. If you guys have ever watched Grey's Anatomy or, I don't know, different health medical shows, smooth muscle, whenever they're performing surgery, you could see that shiny layer on the outside of the organs. So smooth muscle goes on the outside of our internal organs, and it is an involuntary muscle. What does that mean if a muscle is involuntary? In this case, the organ is involuntary.
You don't control it.
We don't
No
control
movement.
it. Very good. We don't control it. It works on its own. Imagine if you had to sit here day to day and be like, okay, stomach, it's time for you to start digesting, or tell your heart to beat or your lungs to breathe. Those are involuntary muscles. They work without us thinking about it. So that brings up the next muscle, which is cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is a striated muscle, meaning if you look at the surface of it, it actually has kind of stripes to it, but they're short stripes. They're not long like what we see in our skeletal muscles. And cardiac muscle makes up the heart, our arteries, veins, and capillaries. It's a pretty tough muscle. Think about it. It has a really important job by carrying our blood flow for keeping our heart beating. And again, cardiac muscle is also involuntary. So it works completely on its own without our thought process or our control. And then last but not least, what we are going to be dealing with the most is skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle, hopefully if you guys ever go off to grad school, or if you ever have the chance to sit in on maybe a surgery, maybe you've seen muscle in person before, like actual muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle is striped. It looks like it has stripes going down the muscle tissue. And that's because it's a tube called a sarcolemma. The tubes, there's millions and billions of little tubes called sarcolemmas. And that's what creates that striated, long striped look. Skeletal muscle is completely voluntary. We could sit all day long and not move until we decide we want to, because again, muscles are voluntary. There's certain muscles such as our blinking reflexes in our eyes that they have, once again, it's still voluntary, but it also has a reflexive inhibition to it, which makes us blink without really kind of thinking about it. So we have subconscious control over certain muscles for us to not have to consciously think about it. So here's some really interesting statistics. There are more than over 600 muscles in our body. By the end of this course, you guys are going to know almost all 600 muscles. We go through a lot. That might sound kind of intimidating, but we take it group by group. We take it action by action. Our muscles make up 40 to 50% of our body weight. That's why I tell athletes all the time, I don't want you to ever feel, whenever you step on a scale, to feel very self-conscious of your weight, because most of it is muscle. Our body fat really doesn't make up that much weight to the body, along with our bones. Our bones are actually very heavy as well. And one of the most important things, don't worry about our 75 pairs involved in locomotion. Our muscles are responsible for producing body heat. We do this through active movements. So by generating our muscles to fire and to actually work, that's producing heat in the body itself. Okay, now we're getting on to some very, very important muscle terminology. The first term is called the origin of the muscle. Okay, the origin is the stable end of a muscle connection. So the origin is usually closest to the trunk of the body, and it is the more stable end of the muscle connection. What that means is stable means there's not a lot of movement really going on there. There is some, but not as much as the insertion. When we start our next unit in like a week or two, that'll make a lot more sense, the origin and the insertion, why the insertion needs to be the more movable end. So just to kind of reiterate, the origin is the stable end. The insertion end of the muscle is the movable end. Okay, this next term is probably one of the most important concepts that I need everyone to take the time to think about. Contraction. The simple word contraction, all it means is the insertion end of a muscle moves towards the origin of the muscle. So the movable end, when the muscle contracts, I don't know if anyone knows this or not, when the muscle contracts, it shortens. That's what happens. The muscle shortens. So the movable end, aka the insertion, goes towards the origin. And that's how we get that shortened contraction. Very, very rarely do we ever have the opposite, meaning a reverse muscle action. And that's when the origin moves towards the insertion. You will almost never see that. It is very rare to find within our skeletal muscles. So I'm going to give you guys an example to try and think about. I have a sweatshirt on, which isn't really helping, but everyone knows where their bicep muscle is, correct? We can all feel our biceps right here. Our biceps muscle, the origin, aka the start of the muscle, is up. There's two starts up on our shoulder. There's basically one here and then one here. Then the tendon, it comes down, so the muscle continues to come down. Here's our muscle belly. And then it will insert, so the insertion point is going to be down here past our elbow. So it starts up here, the origin. So this is the stable end since it's closer to the trunk. And then the muscle comes down and it will insert past our elbow here. Our biceps muscle is responsible for elbow flexion. So if you know that the insertion is the movable end, correct? So if the insertion is the movable end, it's going to be on the end, the body part that is moving. Okay? The origin starts here, travels down, will insert here. Stable, moving. The muscle contracts, so our muscle's going to contract and shorten. So now my insertion point is going to move towards the origin. It's here, and now it moves towards the origin. Does that make a little more sense as to origin and insertion?
I got a quick question. Is the origin always going to be at the top of a muscle, like the top?
Not necessarily. You're gonna see, Deshaun, that's a great question. You're gonna see that the muscles, it's not always gonna be on top. Some muscles kind of go from side to side. Some muscles kind of go on an angle. So it all depends on the shape of the muscle, but the origin's always gonna be on the stable, kind of the further end, if that's what you're asking, closer to the body, like the trunk of the body. But it's not always gonna be on top, because sometimes it's like this. So the origin will be here, insertion will be out here.
Okay.
Does that make a little more sense? You'll see in a minute, we go through different shapes of muscles. So you'll kind of start to picture, okay, this end is closest to the whole trunk of the body. This end is further away. So here's another example. Here's our rectus femoris, which is part of our hamstring muscle. I'm sorry, our quadricep muscle. Wow, Tuesday morning. The origin of our rectus femoris is up on our hip, so all the way up here. And then the insertion is distal, meaning it's going away from the trunk. The insertion is all the way down here past the knee. So in this case, Deshaun, yes, the origin is on top, insertion is on the bottom, but it's not always going to be like that. Okay, so here I'm going to give you different examples now as to how that theory is different. So we're going to look at muscles, how they're named, why they're named. And what they are usually named for is either by their shape, their location, or their function. So if you're ever super stuck on where is the let's see, where is the pectoralis major muscle located? The pectoralis major muscle is located in the pectoral region. So it'll at least give you an idea, okay, this is where it's located. It's in the pectoral region. So then you could start breaking down little clues to try and help you remember what that muscle is responsible for. So the first one, again, muscles could be named for form or for shape. The deltoid muscle is a prime example. The deltoid muscle is in a triangular shape. So we have a deltoid on the front, the side, and the back, but all three of them are in a triangular shape. The term deltoid means triangle. Action. You're going to see that most muscles are named for their action. So for instance, an example is our pronator teres muscle. Pronator teres is located on our forearm, and it is responsible for forearm pronation. Those are the best. They give you the prime clue as to what this muscle is responsible for, what action it will perform. There's another muscle called the pronator quadratus. Take a guess. What do you think the action is? Pronation. Oops. Location. location, location, location. It is very true. A lot of muscles, again, are named after where they are located. I wish I had my scapula with me. In A&P, you guys should have went through the bony landmarks of the scapula. On the scapula are three major fossas. We have our supraspinous fossa, infraspinous fossa, and the subscapular fossa. What do you know? There are three muscles with those exact names. Our supraspinatus muscle is in the supraspinous fossa. The infraspinatus muscle is in the infraspinous fossa back here. Remember, it's under the spine of the scapula. I don't know why that one's not labeled, but I can add that. And our subscapularis sits in the subscapular fossa. So location is another means of naming muscles. Again, more location. Our internal and external intercostals. The term costal always refers to the ribs. If you ever see the word costal, C-O-S-T-A-L, it always is referring to our ribs. So these little root words or keywords can go a long way with telling you about the muscle location and a lot of information about it. So here's another location example. This one is named for the origin. So it says insertion site. When it, I'll change that to make it not confusing. The coracobrachialis. If you break this up, coraco originates at our coracoid process. Remember, the coracoid process is that bony landmark on the front of the scapula. So the origin for this muscle is the coracoid process, and it inserts midway down the brachium, aka our humerus. Brachium or brachialis just means arm. So it inserts halfway down the humerus. So the origin and insertion for this muscle are all right here. Can anyone remember a neck muscle that has the origin and insertion directly in the name of this muscle? Let's think back to good old A&P. A neck muscle that has the origin and insertion directly in the name. How about this muscle?
What about the sternocleidomastoid?
Yeah. Hold up. Who just said that?
Christina.
Great job, Christina. Sorry.
Thank you.
I have the Zoom pictures very small. Very good. Our sternocleidomastoid. Remember, let's turn our heads. And this major tendon originates at our sternum and the clavicle, comes all the way up and inserts on our mastoid process. So that's another great example of origin and insertion. Tyler, so the levator scapula, that's kind of a combination between location and action. So that's actually a really good example. The levator scaps, it does elevation of the scapula, so that's where the levator comes from, and it does insert onto our scapula. It originates on our cervical spine and part of our occipital bone, but it does have the action and at least the insertion point. So it's a good example. But very good. You guys are starting to get the hang of it, breaking apart these words and figuring out what either the action is, location, etc. A lot of these are going to be a big review. Oops, jumping ahead. Okay. Next, we are going to look at the macro structure of a muscle. So we will eventually do the micro structure. We're going to look at the macro structure, which is the gross anatomy of a muscle. So every muscle has a tendon and some sort of muscle belly, meaning that's kind of, the muscle belly is the thick of the muscle. Some muscle bellies are way more prominent than others. Like your biceps has a very notable muscle belly, but then there's other muscles such as tiny muscles in your cheek. They're much smaller. But the muscle belly is where our contractile tissue is located. So our contractile tissue is where our sarcomeres are. Remember, the sarcomeres are those tubes that make the stripes. So contractile tissue is what we use to have a muscle contract. We're going to go, and that's part of the microstructure of the contractile tissue, which we will get into hopefully on Thursday. Okay, the tendon of the muscle. Tendon connects muscle to bone. Never, ever, ever forget this for as long as you live. I will not allow any of you to pass kinesiology if you do not remember a tendon connects muscle to bone. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscle to bone. The muscle belly, as you see, it starts getting narrow and it creates, and it kind of transfers into this tendinous connective tissue. The tissue that makes up a tendon is way different than the tissue that makes up muscle belly. And then the last portion is called an aponeurosis. So an aponeurosis is basically fascia. So see the outside covering of the muscle here? I don't know if everyone can see my arrow.
You can see it.
This area, it's called fascia. Fascia is a thin but pretty tough, flat, tendon-like tissue that covers the outside of the muscle. An aponeurosis is taking that fascia and flattening it into a sheet. So instead of it covering the muscle, aponeurosis is that fascia that's more in like a sheet format shape. An example of an aponeurosis, your plantar fascia. How many of you have heard of plantar fascia before? I'm sure most of you have heard of the term at least. Your plantar fascia is a tendinous sheath on the bottom of your foot. And that is an example of an aponeurosis. So plantar fascia is an aponeurosis. Okay, going a little bit further into the makeup of our muscle and the macro structure of the muscle. So we've already mentioned our tendon. We already kind of talked about the fascia a little bit further. Now, the outside covering. So let's go one layer deep to the fascia. This is called the epimysium. epimysium. So the epimysium is one layer deep from the fascia. And the epimysium is covering this entire outer edge. So if we take all of those tubes, the sarcomeres put together and the fascicles put together, the epimysium is going to cover that outside. And then the fascia covers the epimysium. Very, very important root word to remember. Epi usually signifies more superficial. When we covered the bones, oops, sorry, there's people in the chat. Huh. Oh, no problem, Lakeem. I got you. I apologize. Epi, EPI, represents a more superficial layer. Endo always represents deep. So for an example, comparison example, our epidermis is the superficial layer of our skin. The epidermis is the most superficial layer. So the epimysium is going to be a superficial layer covering the muscle. So now we're going to get a little bit further. If I zoom in, can you guys still see that if I zoom in? Okay,
Yes.
cool. So when I zoom in, not looking at the zoomed in picture, do we see all of these little groups put together? They look very, very tight and compact. I'm gonna hope everyone can see that. So all of these, they kind of look like fruity pebbles all clumped together, right? So all of those clumps are going to be fascicles. So number 4 is fascicle, and it's all of these, they're tubes clumped together. So these are big tubes all grouped together. That is a fascicle. The tissue that sits around the fascicle, that is called the perimysium. Peri is more the middle. So the direct outer covering of the fascicle is the perimysium. Okay, now here we have one fascicle pulled out. So here's the whole grouping of fascicles, but now we have one big fascicle pulled out. Inside of one fascicle, we have sarcomeres. So a sarcomere is a muscle fiber. They mean the same thing. Sarcomere and muscle fiber mean the same thing. So a muscle fiber, everyone has seen a pool noodle before. Like you've played in the pool, you got those long noodles with the hole down the center. People not know what I'm talking about? Am I aging myself? Do we not play with pool noodles anymore? Okay. So
They're made of, right?
All right, good. So, okay. So a muscle fiber looks like a pool noodle through and through, because on the inside of a pool noodle, it's hollowed out. On the inside of a muscle fiber is where all of our contractile tissue is located. So a muscle fascicle holds a ton of pool noodles, aka muscle fibers. All right. And then lastly, the covering on the outside of a muscle fiber is the endomysium. Twizzlers, they do look like Twizzlers. Group some Twizzlers together. Absolutely, Tyler. Great example. Twizzlers. Who knows? Kids these days don't know pool noodles, don't know Twizzlers, but group them together. A fascicle is a group of Twizzlers or pool noodles, and those represent muscle fibers. On the inside of the muscle fibers is where our contractile tissue is located. So that's where the true sarcomere actually is, inside of the pool noodle, inside of the muscle fiber. The tissue covering the outside of our pool noodle here is the endomysium. So this is the deepest covering. I'm going to type something in the chat, which might help you. Okay. So the epimysium covers the massive group. Oh, I went back a slide. Sorry. Epimysium covers the massive group of fascicles. The perimysium covers one individual fascicle. Fascicle holds group of muscle fibers. The endomysium covers one muscle fiber. Okay. Does that help and make a little more sense as to this entire macro structure? I know that's a lot of information. Okay, cool. It's just breaking it down, getting further and further in. It's actually really, really neat. And when we get to, definitely not today, when we get to how the inside of the muscle fiber works, you're going to learn how our muscles contract. How do we make a movement occur? It's really interesting, in my opinion. Okay. Where are we at on time?
Is there like a way like you could remember that, like if you ask us that on the test or something? From, like, tendon all the way down.
Just I would practice this, Sean, studying, like print out a slide. I think I have study slides actually of labeling, and just practice labeling and getting an idea of how it goes from the superficial, so the outside layer, and it keeps getting deeper and deeper. The more you see the picture, the more sense it's going to make. And you know how I made a comparison about pool noodles? You got to figure out exactly what you can compare it to help you remember it, whether it be Twizzlers or pool noodles or something. But I will send you the study slides for labeling, which will help with that for sure.
So will you
Can I remember?
Oh,
you could go, Deshaun.
Deshaun, go ahead.
No, because like I remember like in anatomy, they used to have like little like sentences that be like, so you just remember like each one. I don't remember what it's called. It was like if you had, it was like if you had like bones, like to remember like all the bones. I think it was like carpal bones, so remember all the carpal bones.
Oh, like a mnemonic?
Yeah, like that.
Like the Sally left the party to take Kathy home, carpal bone mnemonic thing?
Yeah, is it like that for like that muscle group right there or no?
I don't think so, but we can make one up. Maybe not right now, but we can make one up. Why not? I'll work on that. I could be pretty creative. Let's see what I can do. Ray, go ahead.
Will you post the study slides with this PowerPoint?
Uh-huh.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. The study guide will have all the information, what's on the exam, and I will post study slides to help label.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, just Sean, I'll see what I can come up. I can get creative. Anyone else comes up with something, just let me know. Share to the class. Okay. Fiber arrangements. So the muscle fibers and those fascicles, so the fascicles hold the group of muscle fibers. Those are the striations that you're looking at. So when you look at the muscle and it looks like stripes, all of these, it has some sort of stripe or long lines coming down, right? That is what the fiber arrangement looks like. The fiber arrangement is the direction of the fiber. So Deshaun, I think it was you earlier saying how the origin and insertion, is it always on the top? Origin always on the top, insertion on the bottom. This is going to demonstrate how that's not always going to be the case because our fiber arrangements and directions are all different. So the first fiber arrangement, our fusiform. This is a prime example of usually when our origin will be at the top and the insertion will be at the bottom. So fusiform has a tendon and then a big muscle belly and then another tendon for the insertion. The fiber arrangement for this muscle, let's get a pen. Origins at the top, insertions at the bottom. So when the muscle contracts, the insertion goes that way. So the muscle shortens from here and it goes towards the top. Now for the next type of muscle fiber arrangement are parallel. These are small groupings of very short fibers. So our rectus abdominis has different layers. They're parallel to one another, but they all fire in separate chunks. So the origin for one will be up here, insertion will be here, and then another origin, insertion. And so they all fire in groups. But the fibers are parallel to one another. Okay, our next muscle are convergent. This muscle, our pectoralis major, actually is turned, if you take this muscle right here, turn it sideways, So the tendon is facing laterally. This whole side, the origin, this muscle originates from our clavicle all the way down our sternum. So here's our first example of an origin that is not just on the top, it's also on the side of the muscle. And then the insertion is lateral. So it originates here, the muscle gets wide, and then it gets narrow and inserts on our humerus. So that's an example of how the origin, it's closest to the trunk for sure, but it's not just on top, it's also on the side close to the trunk. And then the insertion turns into one narrow tendon and inserts on the humerus, which is lateral. The humerus is going to be the movable end, right? It's our moving bone. Let's see. Okay, cool. All right, this next muscle, the origin is kind of on a diagonal and a slant here. This is called a unipennate muscle. Unipennate, and we have a bipennate. So the bipennate, everyone has seen a feather from a bird, I'm assuming, hopefully. A bipennate muscle looks like a feather. So a unipennate is half of a feather. And again, this particular origin is very long, wide, but also on a diagonal. That is our palmar interosseous, which we'll get into when we get to the hand. And then a bipennate looks like a full feather. So here, the tendon goes up the middle, like that, and fibers come out from the middle. Actually, the origins up here, so they come down instead of go out. But just looking at the direction from the tendon being in the middle.
It kind of looks like a feather.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, yeah. A bipennate, I'm pretty sure the term pennate actually means feather. So exactly, a bipennate is a feather. A unipennate is half of a feather. And then lastly, not lastly, the multipennate is multiple feathers. Multiple feathers, so those fiber arrangements, again, the origin is up top and it's wide, but then the fibers come down towards the center tendon. They come down. So origin, insertion, and then it all comes together to create one tendon. And then last but not least is our circular muscles. We have a few in our face, so our eyes, our orbicularis oculi, our orbicularis oris, our mouth muscle, are circular, and here's the tendon, and the fiber goes completely around. So the circulars are very, very random and rare, but they're pretty cool, very different. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to stop the share because the rest I will pick up on Thursday because I wanted to edit some of the other slides that I didn't have a chance to. And we will get into that on Thursday. Does anyone have any questions over anything we went today or the exam? Anything? Lab? I don't know.
Next Tuesday, are we doing like a review or are we starting like a new like chapter as well? Like
Tuesday?
yeah.
So Mercedes, the goal is to have an in-class review. However, if I do not complete everything I want to on Thursday, actually, we are going to be doing some stuff on Thursday. I'm hoping it'll only be for the first bit of class, and then we can do a full in-class review. If not, we're just not going to get to it. I try and build them in, but sometimes it's not always realistic. Depends how long we take on certain sections. Okay, before everyone jumps out, I just need to screenshot attendance. There's just way too many of you for me to write down. This makes it way easier. Okay, I think I got everyone. All right, guys, have a wonderful day, and I will see y'all